All right, so we're going to get going again. We have a limited amount of time in this room, and people keep telling me they've got more questions. I want to get more in. And we have more chairs. I'm so excited that nobody has to stand in the back for the rest of this. So I have queued up another question to get us started here. Erin, right in the front of the room, had a question at the break, and I asked her to hold it so we could all hear the answer because it is relevant to so many of us. So, Erin, I'm going to ask you to get started, and I'll give you my mic to ask the question, since I don't know where they are right now. There we go from there.
Hi. So I have an early stage ed tech company, and as part of my beta test, I'm building around the use case of a client organization. And I was wondering, in situations like this, how far should you go in terms of building features you hadn't originally imagined being part of the MVP?
Well, if you didn't imagine them being part of the MVP, where are they coming from? Not from your imagination, but from the client's
The client
one-off
has
request.
ideas. Well, the client has all of their process that they normally do, and the idea of automating that process is really exciting.
Is it exciting to you?
I think if it could be useful for other organizations, it would be exciting, but there's
So what's the problem? You already know the answer to your question.
I don't think it would be useful to everyone.
So therefore?
I'm not sure if I should build a feature if I think it's going to be useful for X percentage of people, or if I should build, or if this is like, if building a use case like this, you should just build whatever they want and then test all those features and then tear down.
Yep.
That's what.
Yeah,
keep building what they want.
don't do that.
Oh no.
No. Thank you for the question, but no, don't do that. So I don't know if anyone remembers in the book, I have this thing where I talk about how the really irritating thing about lean startup is that you have to ask customers what they want and then not listen to them. And again, it's one of those things that human beings are just not good at. It's like, if I care about someone's opinion, then I should be doing whatever they say, and if I'm not going to do whatever they say, I shouldn't care about their opinion, and that's all backwards. The critical thing is to remember, the MVP is an experiment designed to help you learn. But it's not just designed to help you learn in general. Like, you could go to law school and you could learn things in general law school. You could like go on Wikipedia and learn a lot of ways you could learn things. It's about to help you learn something very, very particular. The question is, will this experiment help me learn if my strategy is taking me closer to my vision or not? So any experiment that takes you off strategy is by definition a mistake. So a customer says, I want you to, add this extra feature. You have to be really serious to be like, well, do I really want to learn about this extra feature or not? Is it going to help me? If the answer to that is no, you absolutely shouldn't build it. And the reason why it's so important not to build it is you got to go back to the customer and say, thank you for your feedback. And you got to find a diplomatic and nice way to say, we're not doing what you want. Like sometimes you can be like, well, we're going to put it on the roadmap for future releases. You can, there's all kinds of euphemisms for it where it's never going to happen. You talk to a product manager, they know every way to say no that sounds like yes in the book. Second only to VCs at that master art. So now sometimes what will happen is you go to the customer and they're like, oh yeah, that's a deal breaker. F you. You don't build that feature, I'm out. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're really doing this, you got to be like, I'm so sorry to hear that, goodbye. And you got to walk away. Because the only way to find out if it's actually a deal breaker or not, you have to let them break the deal. Now, here's the good news about being an entrepreneur. You can always go back and unbreak the deal. I'm so sorry I said that. I don't know what I was thinking. Upon further reflection, you are a genius, and I should do everything you say, of course. What was I? Of course, can we please have the deal back? Like, very few people will be so spiteful as to say no to that. And if they're really that spiteful, do you really want that person to be your customer? No, back to the Bob Sutton thing? You don't. So you've got to be willing to find out what's really necessary. So what I really recommend is with the MVP, you really stick to your guns. This is why we call them leap of faith assumptions. You got to act as if the assumptions are true, but not forever. Only until such a time as you're ready to make a pivot. So what happens in this situation is customers say, I want this, I want that, especially because this is a multi-channel problem, right? You're going to help these educators, or you say client organizations. They're probably helping administrators, help teachers, help students. Am I right?
It's a nonprofit that deals with students.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Even worse. Yeah, so you're going to help this nonprofit. So like, you have this intermediary problem where you're talking to an intermediary who says students really need to like stand on their head to learn best. You're like, I think that's what students want, but you're the one paying the money for this thing, so I don't want to be rude and say you don't know what you're talking about, but on the other hand, you actually don't know what you're talking about, so it's very tricky. So you got to really figure out, like, you gotta just keep your focus on what is actually gonna help students and help this person be successful. One of the frustrating things about customers is you're actually helping them be more successful at their job, but they often complain about it while it's happening. And we see this problem a lot, pick your favorite domain, like, the coach that's super unpopular, but their team gets great results, or, the politician who, makes the hard choices for the country, but people are mad at him at the time. Not that I'm thinking about anybody in particular. But what's frustrating about it is you gotta really ask yourself, do I wanna be right and get credit, or do I wanna actually deliver the results and be successful? And I think as an entrepreneur, you gotta be like, gotta put the throttle on, do what it takes and get results. And if people are mad at you at the time, they get yelled at, or whatever, like all the kinds of like churn that kicks up, you gotta just be prepared to have another way to deal with that other than getting into arguments and fights about it. I find this personally very difficult. I like to be right and win, and I want to punch back.
What do we want to be right, or do we want to, build the right thing? I was like, why is that an either or? Can't we do both?
Sure, yeah, just punch the person in the face and punch them into submission, and then everything will be fine. And it's like, except for the resentment that comes with the person having lost the battle with you. So the trick, and there's someone who actually works in sales professionally here, they're going to be like, no, duh. You got to find a way to make it a win-win for the client, for them to do what you want. So it's not like you don't want to have them just feel good. You want them to feel good while giving you what you want. That's the art of sales. So for the MVP, so there's like a really good rule of thumb with MVP questions, which is if you're thinking about doing more for the MVP, just don't do it. Because there's a great asymmetry in MVPs. There's the cost of adding a feature and having it be a mistake. And then there's cost of not adding a feature and having it be necessary. So those are the two bad things that might happen. And it's really asymmetrical payoffs. If something is necessary, you don't have it, you're gonna find that out real soon and you're gonna add it, no problem. Whereas if you add something and it turns out not to be necessary, you wasted precious time and you elongated your build, measure, learn cycle time. So you didn't get the feedback till later. So it's much better, you're much better off being too minimal than too maximal, because it's easy to apologize and add more. Plus, the asymmetry is driven by the fact that things have to get built in time. So my favorite thing is someone's like, I'm gonna build these 10 features in this order, and then I'm going to launch the product. It's like, well, since you have to build the features in order, there will be a time when the only product you have is an MVP with only 5 of the 10 features. Why not just release that? Because you have to build it anyway. Even just to test it, to make sure that the 5 features are working. There was a time when the MVP existed, and you were like, I'm so arrogant, I can't allow customers to see this precious thing that they might actually like. And then that gets to the real entrepreneurial fear, which is, what if people like it without the feature? I'll never get to build it. Again, do you want to be right, or do you want to have the impact? So in this situation, what we're trying to do is figure out what features actually have broad applicability. And you won't really know until you see a feature used by multiple clients. But that's a long time from now. When you only have one client to start with, you've got to take your best judgment about what the features you think are really necessary for the wide deployment and really try to get the client to accept that. And after you've really beat your head against the wall, if it's really a deal breaker and there's absolutely no way that you get them to accept what you were planning to do, you can then say, well, if something is going to be widely applicable, it also has to be applicable to this person. So if it's really a deal breaker here, then you got to add it and find out, or you got to find a second client. But it sounds pretty easy when I'm describing it, and I want to honor the fact that the situation is actually very difficult, because you're trying to get close to customers, you're trying to build that relationship with them. You really do want to give them what they want, and here we're saying, don't do that. And this is goes back to the lead bullets thing. It's just hard. It's actually not that complicated. And
we lied before the break when we said this was the magic.
Oh, just kidding. There's no magic. There's never a magic bullet. Except the thing about entrepreneurs that I really admire is they're always looking for the magic solution, but they don't really need it. The entrepreneurs that I know have practically unlimited energy and a true willingness to bang their head against the wall over and over and over and over and over again. And some problems can be solved that way. And so, and most people in the world don't have that kind of perseverance and stamina and strength to do what many of you in this room do. So they're the ones that need the magic bullet. All we need to do is get you guys, you're already firing the gun on overload every day, most of you. So all we need to do is get it pointed in the right direction and you'll be fine. So I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but I'm trying it out for the first time, but it's just occurring to me that as long as you don't get distracted and you really let yourself do what you know is right, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna figure it out, and your client will come around, I predict, in the end.
Yeah, so on that point, one of the things that I liked about Aaron's question is that she's dealing with a situation that many people have, even if you're not working in ed tech, which is that your customer and your user are different. And you don't even know necessarily what the users want or what the person who's gonna, user is very software specific. If you're in any business, you could have this problem. But you don't even know what they want, and the client's telling you a bunch of things. How do you get beyond that level? And so one way is you fire the client, right, because they're not willing to work with you. But where have you seen people help clients come around to letting you try more things?
Yeah. So we see this a lot. And I've come around, I used to use, there's a whole language people use. There's the customer is the person that pays you money, the user, I can't remember there's also the terminology, the like saboteur, the decision maker, like in the sales, in various sales methodologies, they have personas and things, and people debate endlessly in certain circles, like what does it mean to be a customer, and is someone who, I like the saying, if you get the product for free, you're not the customer, you're the product. And like, I see what people are trying to say by that, but like I've really come around to, if someone's a key stakeholder of the ecosystem that you are trying to influence as an entrepreneur, then they're your customer. And therefore, if there's multiple customers, you have a multi-customer segment problem, and you need to treat it like a multi-customer segment problem. Now, some people know two-sided marketplaces, right? Like eBay, you got the buyers and the sellers, and it's really hard to figure out what is the Venn diagram of things the buyers want and things the sellers want. Like, what's in that center sweet spot that can serve both at the same time, and it's hard. People don't always see that same dynamic at play in like a nonprofit that has people that, students that get served and the philanthropists that fund the nonprofit, like I'm feeling now is those are just two different customers. And people debate, is your channel partner, like if you sell electronics through Walmart to the end user, like is Walmart your customer or is the end user your customer? And the answer is they're both your customer. You gotta make Walmart happy and you gotta make the end user happy. And the only difference in these, and so you have a multi-segment problem, is basically you're just trying to find a solution that works sufficiently well for each of the segments for the magic to happen in your engine of growth, like we're talking about in the first this morning. So the only real difference is situations where the segments are independent versus where they're dependent. So buyers and sellers on eBay are more or less independent segments. You can actually have separate products even. Like a seller's view of eBay and the UI and everything about it can be quite different than the buyer's view of eBay, and that's no problem. Whereas in Walmart, you have dependent segments. The end user buys from Walmart, who buys from you, and therefore the happiness of the end user matters a lot to Walmart and matters to you, by transitive properties. Does that distinction make sense? So when we're dealing with that sell-through dependent segment, I really think there's a powerful tool that entrepreneurs don't use often enough, which is to do the channel partner's job for them and help them get better at their own job. Another way of saying it is when you sell a product to a customer, especially in enterprise and B2B kind of situations, but this is true sometimes even in consumer products, I always try to think about, even if formally what's happening here is someone buys a product from me which they then own, what's really happening is that I have just entered into a joint venture with the customer to serve their customer. That's honestly what's happening, right? If I sell equipment to a company who then uses that equipment for some purpose, they didn't buy equipment for me, they bought an outcome that's helping them do their jobs better. Walmart doesn't buy stuff for me because they're excited to have my stuff. They want stuff off their premises as soon as possible into the hands of their actual customers, and they want those customers to be happy with it, and if they're not, then they're not happy either. Does that make sense, this kind of joint venture concept? So now we're saying, I want to enter into a joint venture with you, and you're like, great, I know everything that needs to be done. You got to make the thing purple, and you got to do the sand on your head and do all that stupid stuff, and you're like, I'm pretty sure that's wrong. Now, should we get into an argument and debate in our joint venture? We're going to get our partnership off to a great start. We're going to have a big argument about who's right and who's wrong about what. Or should we say, I'm just going to go run an experiment with your end customer and demonstrate that this approach is best and bring that information to you and let you make the decision about what to do with that information. I'm going to help you be better at your job by bringing you information that you didn't have. And I've seen this a lot of situations where people who are very firm in their convictions about what customers want react very differently when presented even with a modest amount of data about the new thing.
Can we get an example of that? Because as you're saying that, I'm like, well, I'm not going to give you access to my customers.
Oh yeah, and you don't ask for permission, you got to go around. But we're entrepreneurs, really good at going around. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you an actual example that involved not Walmart, but another large retailer. This was a business that sells through those kinds of, sells in big box retail and also sold by independent distributors. So, the perennial debate between should you go to a big box retailer or to the mom and pop shop to buy this kind of product, like this is a company that sells both. Now by volume, the vast majority of their revenue is sold through the big box retail channels, as you can imagine, and the mom and pops are quite a small segment. So their tendency was to go to the big box guys and do whatever they wanted. So you go to the big box retailer and say, tell me what you want and we'll do anything you want. And the mom and pop people were basically disregarded. And so, but on the other hand, they were pretty much convinced in this particular situation that the big box retailers didn't actually know what their customers wanted, because this is one of, I mean, think about how many products are in a Walmart, right? Like, this is one of a million products that they sell. You know, they're not that focused on it, and the person who's making the decision about what should be carried on the shelf is mostly focused on how do I keep the shelf arranged in an orderly fashion, more than they really are focused on the customer. This is not Walmart, but another company. It's not as customer focused. And the suggestion I had with them was like, look, go into an actual store, change the way the product is sold, change the fee, and show that it's better. And they're like, we could never convince the big box guys to do that. I'm like, that's fine, we'll do it in mom and pop stuff. Like, do you think you convince a mom and pop store? And they're like, oh, we can't because, this is my favorite excuse ever. This product, in order, the display of the product is actually quite expensive. You have to, it's complicated to show it in action, and so the retailers have to build out a whole thing around it to show it. And the way that it works in the business is you actually buy a product from the company, which you then place on your floor and show it in context. So it's actually expensive to buy. Now, for the big box retailers, not that expensive, it's just one. They're going to buy 1,000 of them anyway, so they buy 1,001, they have a floor sample, and they do floor sample sales periodically, and you go in and buy the used one, right? You know what I'm talking about? But for a mom and pop retailer, a huge amount of their balance sheet is tied up in all these display things. So what happens was, this company would come out with a new version of the product, and the mom and pop guys wouldn't necessarily buy it for display right away, because they couldn't afford it. They would wait sometimes up to a year before they incurred the expense of swapping out the new one. So now think about the build, measure, learn cycle time of this business. It takes all the time we had to have part of the legacy product development process. So it takes freaking forever to design the thing and then manufacture it and then build it. And then we wait an extra year for the mom and pop guys to actually put it on the floor. And it was just like, you're a multi-billion-dollar company. Mom and pop guys are like a multi-thousand-dollar company. Whose balance sheet should this be on? Does that really make sense? And they were like, that's just the way it is. And we're like, well, why don't we go to one of these mom and pop stores and say, we will, at our expense, put the display in the way that we think it should be as an experiment. And if they don't like it, at our expense, we'll put it back the old way. And they were like, oh, if we did that times, they're like, you know how many retailers there are in the world? If we did that, it would cost us, X million. I was like, first of all, X million dollars is not that much compared to you constantly launching products that nobody buys. So that's a pathetic excuse, and I can't believe you're using it. But also, I didn't say every mom and pop store in the whole world. I said one mom and pop store. Is there one in your city near your headquarters? Oh yeah, we love the guy at Joe's, mom and pop. Like, could we go down to Joe's mom and pop? They'll never share their customer data with our very part. I was like, really? For $10,000, they won't give you access? And they're like, well, sure, for money. But we can't afford to pay all the mom. Like, I'm not talking about all the mom. Will you please go down to Joe's and go? And they were like so reluctant to do it. And it was like, and then we got them to do it, and we got them to get the budget to do it. And if they didn't have to bribe Joe's with $10,000, they were perfectly happy to share the internet. They were so thrilled that ginormous Corporation X was very excited to talk. They were like thrilled about it. And they're like, you're gonna pay to put a new cool thing that we're gonna have before the big box guys in our store? And they were like over the moon excited to have employees of big company X in their, in the storefront, like with their clipboards, talking to company. It was like, the retailer was incredibly happy. But then we had a problem. People in the company heard this was going on. They're like, how much time and energy are you investing in improving our sales of one product at Joe's mom and pop? Like, what is the point of this? This is too small. This is terrible. And so they're like, it really was hard for them to remember, no, our goal here is to use this evidence to go back to the big box category buyers and say, look, this product is better this way. This is the way it should be done. And here's the evidence. And the reason we do those small sample size experiments is you want to take your critics and skeptics and force them to resort to this following criticism, which is my favorite criticism of all time, which is, well, sure, that looks great, but that's a very insignificant sample. It's the best criticism in the world, because you're like, couldn't agree more. My budget should definitely be increased to increase the sample size. Like, that's totally right. I mean, you're a genius. And then you make your critic your big ally. And that, you think about it, like, that's actually perfectly reasonable. Like, maybe when we take it to big box retail, they're going to be like, I don't believe it from Joe. They're like, well, could we do it in a couple of your stores? Just to see. If we brought you 10 more stores, what do you need? Like, so now we're getting the conversation away from I'm right, you're right, to how do we get a statistically significant read on this information? And in modern business, there are people who are truly obstinate and can't be convinced with data, but not that many. Most people have a very clear objective that they're trying to accomplish in their job. And if you say, look, I'm going to give you a piece of paper, and you can take to your boss that will make your boss really happy and get you promoted, most people will be like, okay, I'll take that piece of paper. Think of it as very straightforward. So that is usually how it looks like in retail. Now you have to be willing to generalize from that to all the other kind of situations, like students and teachers and administrators and teachers, and if you think about YouTube, content creators and advertisers. Like there's many of these multi-segment situations where you have to go show that something works over here and then bring it to the other person and say, do you agree that this is a valid solution, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the general flavor of it.
All right, thank you for that. So one of the things that we haven't hit on yet today, we've gotten into a lot more like retail goods than we normally do, which is pretty interesting. But we haven't heard yet from anybody who works in a service business, not software, but I mean like where humans deliver the service, or where you're working on a process internally in a company. Any questions on those kinds of things? Yeah.
So I started a company called Next Gen Justice, and it's very similar to LegalZoom, except we don't have an e-commerce strategy. We have what I call a click and mortar approach. So we have retail stores where customers come in and get low cost, convenient legal documents such as a divorce, incorporation, wills, several other things. And the question I have is, when you talk about customer acquisition costs and customer lifetime value, we seem to have based on our research, so we've only been open since March, it takes them between 1 to 6 months to find out about us. So when we're trying to incorporate build, measure, learn, how do we incorporate tests when it's such a long process for them to determine to use us? We're never going to say, your wife is ugly, divorce her. What we'll say is, when you make that painful decision, we'll make the process easy. So
So how do people find out about your service?
So that's the good news, I would say. Word of mouth is the leading indicator. And the second way is the retail locations and walking down the street is definitely a part of our marketing plan. Mm-hmm. But when we make sales, it's kind of like you said, we do want to reinvest back into marketing, and we do want to run marketing tests, everything from different signs in the windows, different posters on the wall, even toying with possibly doing commercials. But if there's that long cycle, I'm just curious, should we just accept that or possibly work to shorten it, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, there's two ways to go with this kind of situation. When you have long cycle time metric that you need to deal with. First is you can look for a leading indicator. I'm just debating between these two approaches in your situation. I'm realizing I'm too ignorant about your business to know which it should be. I'll just tell you both. You can choose for yourself, or we can dive into one or the other. So one is we look for a leading indicator. So you say, look, the problem is we do an advertisement, and we won't know for 6 months if it's successful or not, but in the meantime, we have to run more advertisements. So we need to refine based on what we learned from the first thing. So we say, well, okay, what's the behavior that we do see in 6 months? So like 6 months later, someone buys from us. Well, is it really impossible to know if someone is going to buy from us in 6 months? Is there nothing we can do to find that out? And we live in the era of big data, and there almost always is something you can use as a proxy, an imperfect but directionally correct proxy for that number. So like classic thing would be, if customers like the ad, they're more likely to purchase when the time comes, or they have positive brand awareness, if their net promoter score goes up. Other things we see sometimes is, I don't think this would be appropriate in your business, but sometimes people have a long process of learning more information about the product before they make a purchase. So if we can track, did the ad drive more visits to our website, or did it drive people to go into the store more frequently, to learn more like that? Those are the kind of leading indicators. Again, not perfect, but again, enough to know, are we making, if we do, imagine you did one ad a month for 6 months, and each one took 6 months to pay back. At the end of 6 months, you want to know, did each of the 6 ads, was it better than the one before? Does that make sense? Yes. So that's kind of option 1 for dealing with this kind of problem. Option 2 is to change how you think about cohorts. So we haven't talked so much about cohort analysis. That's when you take a similar group of customers and try to understand their behavior over time. Usually, we start a cohort at the moment they first encounter the product. So a classic web-based cohort analysis is all the people that came to my website for the very first time in March versus all the people that came to my website for the very first time in April. How was their behavior different from each other? Well, one of the reasons it was different probably is because of all the changes we made to the product between March and April, and so therefore we can make an inference that something's going on. You don't have to do the cohort that way, though. You could do it by all the people who were ready to get divorced in March. How was their behavior different than all the people that were ready to get divorced in April? So you could start the cohort clock based on some other event rather than the first time they heard about us, and focus on, even though our ads also build awareness of people who are going to be divorced in the future. I wish we were talking about something less morbid than divorce, by the way.
How about starting a business?
That's much better. That's pretty morbid too when you think about it. But of all the people who are going to start a business, 6 months from now, like just if you think about all the people who are going to see my ad today, they're going to be normally distributed about this axis of how long is it going to be till they are going to start a business, and some people are going to start what happen to be they were ready to start a business that very day, and the ad caught them at the perfect time. So we could just say, well, let's focus only on those people for now, and trust that the effects that we're going to have on those people will be the same as the effects we have on the longer tail folks, and not worry about it. And they use that as our directionally correct but imperfect metric. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, both of these situations have a caveat or a catch you've got to look out for. And there's always a catch. Whenever we're using a leading indicator or some kind of predictor, where I said, look, we'll just trust that, you got to actually go back later and check that the thing that you trusted is actually true. So a classic mistake I see is people who do a regression analysis. And they say, okay, I look at my historical data of all my customers. Like, everyone knows that there's these stats out there that like, if someone gets 10 friends on Facebook before their first week or whatever, then they're much more likely to stay than later. You'll say, okay, it is a fact that if people have more friends, people have greater than this threshold of friends by this certain time, then this good thing is going to happen later. And it's a fact that if they don't have that, the bad thing is going to happen. And so I focus all my energy on getting people from 8 friends to 10 friends, and I have faith that that would mean 6 months later they'll be more likely to be a customer. Everyone's familiar with this. They've ever had one of these regression analysis? There's companies who pay an astronomical amount of money to do this regression analysis for you. Every time I was the recipient of one of these reports, I would always be like, but how do I know if I change the input, that will actually affect the output? Maybe people who are really friendly naturally get 10 friends, and they love my product because they're really friendly. And people who only have 8 friends are not really friendly. And even if I trick them into adding 3 more friends, they're still kind of a jerk. And so they're still not going to have a very good experience. And the regression person would be like, well, you don't, but look at this, look at this great correlation analysis of something else. Look, attention to the man behind the curtain, like, check over here. And it just drive me nuts. It's like, how do I know? So there's no way to know in advance. You're looking at historical data. You can only make correlation inferences. The only way to know is to run the experiment. And if the experiment has a long cycle time, then you won't really, really know that you moved the needle for 6 months. But now we go back to the suggestion I made. Imagine you run 1 ad a month for 6 months, and it takes 6 months for each ad to pay off. Well, 1 month in, you have only 1 month of data to look at from 1 ad, and you'll do the best you can with that information. Again, going back to the theme of small sample size inference. But after 2 months, you've got 2 months of data from 1 ad and 1 month of data from another ad. So you got a little bit more data. 3 months in, you see what's happening? When you finally get to 6 months in, you've made 6 decisions on 6 ads, and you're confident in your leading indicator. But now you're starting to see data show up of the actual causality from 6 months ago. Here's the thing about pipelining from the computer science people in the room. It's called pipelining. If you keep on this pace of an ad a month, not just for 6 months, but forever, then every month you'll both have a new batch of 1-month-old data and a new batch of 6-month-old data. And you can make sure that you're improving both. And if the connection is ever broken between the two, you know you have a problem, not in your ads, but in your kind of analytics framework.
What do you mean by the connection between the two?
So imagine that, I'll tell you a story, actually do a concrete story. I'm not looking at anyone who was with me on this journey in the room. I once spent an enormous amount of time focused on the activation rate for a certain product, which is a classic leading indicator. You have a product that you care a lot about retention rates, and you're like, well, I want to know what the 90 or 180-day retention is going to be of customers. You're like, well, that's too long. But I've noticed through one of these fancy and expensive correlation analyses that if someone is an active customer after 3 days, or I don't know what the number was, 10 days, they're much more likely to be an active customer after 90 days. So let's focus on making the 10-day activation rate higher, and that we trust will do this stuff. So we did that for many, many, many months. We managed to get that activation rate up, but it didn't show up it didn't actually work. Like, we didn't see the long-term retention numbers go up. They were the same. All we were doing was, like, people who were going to churn out anyway, we kind of tricked them for staying a few more days. And we went through a lot of varieties of this. It was one that was like, look, if someone uses the product every day for 5 days, like, then they're going to become a mess. And we were like, great, we made a little contest where you get like special points if you do it each of every 5 days. We did all kinds of things to get the behavior to happen. And it was not part of our discipline to go back and double check that the outcome, that the long-term outcome was the same as what we expected it to be, because we thought the correlation analysis was infallible. Does that make sense what I'm saying? But don't make that mistake.
So So one of the things you said in there was if we have more likes, maybe this leads to more sales. And I assume you meant by that Facebook likes or something?
I didn't, but that wouldn't be bad.
Well, why isn't that bad? When we talk about vanity metrics, and like a classic vanity metric is...
Oh yeah, to a gross numbers of anything is vanity metrics. So never look at it. It's like if you're like, I would do this ad, we got 1 million Facebook likes, like woohoo, like who cares?
Well, first, talk about what vanity metrics are.
So vanity metrics are the numbers that make you look good but are not actionable, don't help you make a good decision. Now the kind, like on my heuristic board is always the kind of metric you would put in your press release to make your competitors feel bad about themselves. Which is a perfectly good use of metrics. Do it. Okay, no problem. I've been on the
Look for
receiving
some from us next week when we talk about what happened at the conference.
Yeah, totally. We'll be like, man, I mean, you got it. Look, and it's, you know, like I always tell people not to use vanity metrics, and I understand that you're going to use them. But I'm like, so I feel very comfortable just railing against them as much as possible in the hopes that you'll only use them like 9 out of 10 times or 10 out of 10 times. It's kind of like, you know, like you want to use your vanity metrics in private when you're home alone by yourself, like do whatever you want with them, okay? That's none of my business. I don't want to know. But when you have to make decisions with your team in public, do not be using vanity metrics because, you know, it's gross. And also very misleading. So here's a situation where you got to figure out, like, if a number goes up, what caused it, right? Why did that happen? So, you know, you get a bunch of Facebook likes after you ran an ad. How do you know that it was related to the ad? So if we're looking for a leading indicator of customer satisfaction, you might say, well, look, somebody clicking like on our brand on Facebook is that kind of leading indicator. Be like, great. I'd like to know likes per person of the population who saw the ad versus a comparable population who didn't see the ad. That's a really good metric. And the gross numbers are irrelevant. What matters is the rate at which, now if you went to the analytics workshop we had on the second day of the conference, you would have, and I think actually Alistair put his 300-page slide deck up on like exactly how to figure out which metrics. I mean, like, there's a lot, you could like go seriously gonzo crazy on, you know, everything to do with analytics, or you can get a 3x5 note card and you can say, you know, like, keep a little tally count of all the people that were affected by the experiment, a little tally count of all those people who did the thing I want, and then you can use division to produce the rate. And sometimes you need the complicated, you know, super system, and sometimes you need the note cards. Like, you know, I don't know where the guy with the hat went, but the hats thing I think you could handle with note cards. You know, if you're running Facebook, you really need the more complicated system. Like, right-size the investment in infrastructure to the complexity of the problem you're looking at. And in particular, remember that a lot of the things you've learned about statistics, to kind of keep on that theme, have to do with signal-to-noise ratio. So when we're looking for something very subtle, you know, like blue button versus green button, like which presidential candidate is 1/10 of a point ahead or behind, like we need big samples, we need complicated systems to be very sensitive. But as entrepreneurs, we tend to start out anyway looking for the really big signals, like, do customers love or hate my product? And like when I was an engineer, I did this all the time, right? Imagine you do 3 usability tests in a row, and all 3 customers refuse to use your product. I'm talking about you paying them to be there for the usability test, and they give you your money back because it's so bad. I've done that, okay? It's really embarrassing. Someone was like, look, 3 in a row, did that. I'm like, that's not a statistically significant sample. Like, what are the odds that we found? I was yelling at the guy who did the usability test. Like, how did you recruit these 3 weirdos? You know, like, I was just like, sure, it was coincidence. And like, when the signal is huge, small samples are perfectly valid in helping you understand that something is significantly wrong here. So yeah, the note card example, like, the reason I tell people to use those kind of simple systems is quite frequently the problem is you show your product to 10 people, you do the ad for 10 people, and 0 of them click like on Facebook. So do we really need 1 million people to find out? Like, nobody likes us, so it's pretty clear.
All right, so one of the things that this last question raised was the issue of long cycle times. And pretty often we get questions from people who say, that's nice, 6 months, whatever. I have such a long cycle time, this stuff just doesn't apply to me. Is anybody in here struggling with that kind of an issue? Okay, let's see, do we have, oh, what's your question?
Rich Marshall. Yeah, I've both, having come from a startup that was involved with dealing with service providers where, you know, the actual time to close out B2B business could easily be a year or 18 months. And I'm now looking at another startup where different market but same kind of problem. So trying to gain, so obviously there are some initial indicators in terms of, you know, you've actually got customers who might want to talk to you. Some of it's because it's quite evolutionary in terms of what you're trying to do. But it's what are those kind of indicators that, firstly, what are the early indicators, but then, you know, trying to get some of that product feedback.
What's the product?
The product let's stick with the one I've come from. That's probably easier. The one I'm going to is probably a bit too easy. It's a bit of a long explanation, and it's probably not one that's done in this forum. But I basically come from the miniature base station market. So you imagine you're selling to the world's mobile operators. So that's the AT&Ts, the Sprints, the Verizons, and you can imagine this is you've taken what was a large lump of equipment, team of engineers to install it, and basically what we did was reduce that down to the size of the Wi-Fi router box you've got at home. It connects into your router box and it acts as a miniature cell station. Sounds very simple, and it is. And one of the things about that is you've got one of the big things is that the mobile operators, the first thing they're worried about is, well, is this product going to break the cell phone network over what you got? And then, of course, there's the usual things like, well, is it going to work? Are the customers going to use it? What are the other problems? How, a whole raft of stuff. So you then get into this whole technical evaluation cycle where the service providers want to evaluate it. That can anywhere be a year.
Okay, I'm going to break in. That's actually, because that's great info. That whole business of having, like, there's a whole technical piece that you have to evaluate before you could actually deploy something, and that's part of the long cycle. How do we deal with that? That's a great kind of question. We hear those all the time. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So what people don't realize is that long cycle time sales processes and deployment processes have a bunch of advantages. And one of the huge advantages of it is that you have this built-in period where you may as well be doing experimentation because you can't do anything else. So there's like a lot of opportunities to say, look, go to a customer and bring them a brochure or something new that you want to see, like, hey, is this something that you'd like to have? If they say yes, it's not like in some businesses, when a customer says yes, you got to give them the product the next day and be like, okay, thanks for your credit card, here's my 2-day shipping, here's the thing. In business with long cycle times, you can do a lot more experimentation of something you don't have yet, because if the customer says yes, you've still got months or years to deliver it. And so that gives you lots of opportunity to take advantage of that, to try different specifications, different approaches, different sales strategies. Like, it's an experimental playground where until the customer says yes, you're not really committed to any specific path. So that's one thing to think about just in general for long cycle time. In this situation in particular, the way I would approach it is to break down each of the steps in the sales process into a traditional sales funnel and focus on the conversion rate from one step to the next with each experiment. So you have, there's always a customer pipeline. Companies like this don't just sell one thing one at a time. You have various customers at various stages. And so one question you got to ask is, how do we get people into technical evaluation as quickly as possible? And you got another question, which is, how do we get people out of technical evaluation as quickly as possible? And I would have an experimental team working on each of those metrics, but not independently, but focused independently on how do I get people from one to the next. So you can imagine that the kind of things you need to do to get people into technical evaluation is you've got to sell the business stakeholders on the awesome business results they're going to get. So what are those results? How do you just explain the ROI? What should the brochures look like? What should the demonstrations look like? What should the fancy marketing stuff look like? And then you're going to have these super skeptical engineers. How do you have to go convince them that the technology actually works to do the thing? Those are really, in a lot of companies, not only are those two independent problems, sometimes those two people don't even talk to each other. You don't even need a Venn diagram. It's awesome. You can sell one thing. You can have a slick PowerPoint that you show to the marketing people and business people, and you can come in with a gritty, oily demo that you lay out across the conference table with the engineers and kind of let them poke through it, and that can be a completely different. It can be so different that even the name of the product or the name of the category of the benefit that you're providing can be different, which is a huge positioning advantage. Some companies have their act together. I was about to say a different word, and in those companies, the engineers and the business people do stuff together as a cross-functional team, and then that's more challenging. You have to actually come in with something that, you have to come with one pitch that works for both, and you really have to do that kind of exercise. If you're the buyer of technology, please do it that way, because then it doesn't allow people to pull this trick on you of selling different things to different people under the same brand and having them all say yes, and God, no one really knows what you said yes to. But if a customer is organized that way, you have to organize your sales presentation to take advantage of that. Otherwise, they won't understand what you're talking about. Does that, what I'm saying, make sense? So the experiment is not just, can I make a sale? That's the last trailing indicator. There's a lot of steps that have to happen before that, and we can try to get better through continuous improvement at each of those individual steps trusting that they'll all add up to a sale in the end.
So there's one very slight twist to that, and I by the way you've got noticing knowledge. So there's a twist to that, you say that's great for that kind of getting the as it were, the principle. Does this principle work for my business? Here's the real twist.
Thank you. So here's the twist. You're in and this applies not just to telecoms, but medical, petrochemical. Often they're highly regulated in terms of their regulatory framework.
Oh, sure.
So you get to a point where you can't experiment anymore because you're now dealing with the operational people, and their take is, okay, we're going to take X version of hardware, X version of software, and we're going to validate that for whatever the period is, a month, 90 days, or whatever that period is. And you can imagine at that point, they will sign off product X. And if, I mean, literally to the point where if you say, well, yeah, we found a problem, right, process resets, restarts all over again.
Yeah.
So I certainly appreciate your input on that.
Oh, sure. I work with a lot of regulated businesses now, and it's funny thing, everyone always says that their regulator is the worst. So the people who do airlines are just like, oh, the FAA is the worst, and the people who do healthcare are like, oh, the FDA is the worst. Everyone's regulator is the most difficult to deal with, and I'm sure you're right. But this is a funny thing. So first of all, in general, the regulator is a customer. You got to deal with, you got a multi-segment problem, how to make the regulator happy and the customer happy. And what's interesting to me is I have so many things I want to say. Let's get this in order. One is, you guys saw Todd Park on stage at the conference. Wasn't he awesome? Before he was the Chief Technology Officer of the United States, he was the Chief Technology Officer of the Department of Health and Human Services that houses, among other things, the FDA. And so he was a big advocate for lean startup in government, like way before it was cool. And he would do all these really cool innovation teams, and we met in the context of doing that. And it was just funny because I happened to be working with a team that was working on how to accelerate medical device approvals of the FDA. And also I was working with actual medical device companies. And the medical device companies are all like, we can't experiment and innovate because the FDA is so slow. And the people at the FDA are like, we can't experiment and innovate because the industry is so slow. And I was like, huh? Right, like each party has gotten used to throwing stuff over the wall at the other party and just, everything's horrible. So like a lot of the so-called regulatory obstacles are fake if you really treated the regulator like a customer and tried to understand what they really care about and what the rules actually say. The problem is that most of the teams that I work with that actually work in regulated industries, especially when they're vendors to a regulated entity, like to a power plant or a hospital, the laws are so incredibly complicated that most teams adopt shorthand rules of thumb or heuristics about what the law allows. The most common one I hear about this all the time, is in medical businesses, you're not allowed, FDA rules say you cannot pre-sell a product, it is illegal. So you go to a hospital and say, we're working on a product that is not yet FDA cleared, we'd like you to pre-order, like you can with a book or app or anything, we use pre-orders all the time. That is illegal in the FDA. And I was working with a medical device company that was talking about doing this, and they're like, oh, it's illegal. And I was finally like, you know what? Is there really a one-sentence law in the federal government that says this is illegal? And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, well, can you point me to the specific statute that outlaws this? And they were like, no, of course not. It's like, who can? Well, somebody in legal told me. It's like, if I go to that person in legal and say, hey, is it a one-sentence statute? Are they gonna laugh in my face? Of course. So it's like, can we get someone on legal on this team to work with us in a cross-functional way to figure out what is act? Oh, we can't have a lawyer on here. Absolutely not. No way. I mean, it was like, well, I just suggest putting a piranha on them for other team. Like, no way. And it was like pulling freaking teeth. I will tell you all the stuff I had to go through to get them to assign a lawyer onto this team on a full-time basis. It was incredibly difficult, but it was so necessary because you're a regulated industry. All the excuses about what you can and can't do they all start in compliance or legal, right? So you got to get that serious about that. And of course, and I wanted them not just to have a legal advisor, but an actual full-time employee of the company on their team in a cross-functional way. And they were like, oh, legal hates us. They're always telling us not to do things. And there's this one guy at legal who just hates us the most, the most curmudgeonly. And I was like, well, we'll take that guy. I don't care. And so you know exactly who got assigned to the project. We forced legal against their will to assign somebody full-time to this team. And we forced the team to put that person on their payroll instead of legal's payroll. So everyone is super cranky. Of course, who's going to get sent? It's the person who hates this project the most. I want you to visualize this. This team comes out to a lean startup workshop with their very upset lawyer who is just having the worst time. Arms crossed, super pissed to be there, like ready to take everybody's head off. And he's just like, why are we doing this workshop? And we're just going through MVPs and experiments, and he was just so antagonistic. And at a certain point, the team was like, well, we got to figure out if we can do this thing, but obviously we can't pre-order the things. And he's like, why not? They're like, oh, the law says. He's like, you're telling me what the law says? He's like, right? And they're like, so he's like, well, if you did it this way, which you guys never do, you always do it that way, the bad way, but if you did it this way, it'd be fine. They're like, what are you talking? Never heard of this. Like, they're like, well, sure, under regulatory exemption 37.2, some point A, like, it says that you're allowed to blah, blah, and they were like, really? He's like, you're not going to listen to me, I'm just your lawyer. And he's like, no, you're on our team, we're like design. He's like, wait, and they got this moment, and then, wait, you're going to design the experiment that way because I just said that? And they're like, oh. It's like, it's done, it's done. There's entrepreneurs in the room, they're like, it's a done deal. We're already, that's like 5 minutes ago. We're now the new team that is organized around exemptions. And he was like, wait, so instead of coming to me at the 11th hour with this cockamamie plan that's terrible, and I say no to, you're going to actually have me involved in the design of the experiment from the first day, so I know it's going to be compliant every step of the way. And they're like, well, what else? What did you think we were going to do? He's like, the thing I just said, which you always do every time. So like, these guys hated each other because they were placed in a system that made them automatic antagonists in a ludicrously stupid process over and over and over again. So they committed what in psychology is called the fundamental attribution error. They assumed that the person they were talking to was a bad person instead of we're stuck together in a bad process. And after this workshop, it was like they were singing Kumbaya together. It was awesome. And someone, I remember somebody who had kind of knew the situation but hadn't been in the workshop afterwards again. They're like, did you put something in that guy's water? What did you do? It's like he didn't become a lawyer in industry because he really wanted to have the job of saying to people no all the time, 24/7, and never getting to do anything. He's having a good time too. So all of a sudden, new process, new results. So, I really, those of you who deal with this regulatory issue, I really encourage you, make sure you're working cross-functionally with someone who actually knows what the regulations actually say, so that you can design experiments that actually would make the regulators happy if they knew what was going on. Because the regulators also didn't go work in government and a career in civil service so they could be a no person all the time. And I'm sure there is that one guy, but most of the people did that because they thought they were going to help accomplish something and help good, safe medical devices come to market. And so if you tell them, listen, the process that you're using is adding an extra 18 months to 3 years delay on processes on average, they're really upset about that. So, a lot of these problems have to do with just the way we have structured these systems and the way that we work together across functions, across public and private sector, not really, nothing intrinsic to the situation, not actually written into the law that way.
All right, so I want to pivot away from regulatory issues for a minute here and talk about pivots, because that's a question we get all the time. So people, not a question, but people are struggling with when do I pivot? Am I at the moment? How do I see this coming down the path? I wonder if anybody in here has a pivot question that you are challenged by right now.
Another one that no one wants to admit.
I know, it's a tough one. Yeah, Jesse Rockman back there. Do we have a microphone? Thank you.
I didn't really have a question, but no one was going, so I figured I'd ask a question.
Thanks for the save.
Is it about your friend's company? It's okay. I understand. Hypothetically speaking, if your friend was in this situation, go ahead.
I got this friend, about 5'10", he's black. No, but it's about me. But I was thinking about, I'm working with a business partner, and he's got all these great ideas, and I have a few too, I think. And we want to just try testing all of them. And I'm just thinking, like, there's just only a few that I really want to do if they're a successful test. So I guess my question is, at what point are you like, it'd be great to test this, but I only really want to do this one. So how do you solve that? How do you deal with that issue?
Yeah, it's actually really simple. The reason we're doing tests is not to learn things in the abstract for our own edification. The point is to deliver certain specific results that will help us get to our vision. So if you're going to run an experiment, I have people do this thought exercise all the time. Visualize yourself, the experiment succeeds, what would you do? Visualize yourself, the experiment fails, what would you do? If the answer to both those things is the same, don't do the experiment. Just do whatever that thing you're going to do anyway. It's just, the experiment is just there to make you feel better about yourself along the way. Don't bother. And the most common thing, usually what we see is people who are like, well, I'm going to build this thing whether the experiment is a success or not. It's like, well, then don't do that. There's really no reason to do an experiment in that case. Like, if you're not prepared to stop if it's wrong. But we also sometimes see people who do experiments on things they don't care about. You know, it's like, here's an idea that won't move the needle, even if it's successful, but I feel obligated to experiment on it rather than just kill it. And that's just, you know, just postponing the inevitable. If you're gonna kill it anyway, just kill it. Or like, if you're not really convinced it's gonna be a good idea, like classic thing is, we wanna get people's buy-in. Sometimes you're like, look, this person has a dumb idea, it's not a good one, but I want them to feel part of the process, and so we'll like do their experiment anyway. You know, that's a mistake. Because if you didn't think it was a good idea in the first place, then at the first sign of trouble, you're gonna be like, see, I knew all along it wasn't a good idea, you're gonna kill it. You're not actually gonna learn anything. Learning from a failed experiment is like, I always liken it to a murder mystery. Like at the beginning, you read a murder mystery, you see a movie, this murder mystery, like somebody died and there's a like question about it, like who did it? Or like, you know who did it, but will the protagonist figure it out? Or like there's something you're confused about, so you're like, ooh, that provides the energy, the impetus to like slog through all this other stuff to like go learn about it. And like, you know, if it's like the Da Vinci Code, we'll like teach you all about the history of Christianity and the Roman Empire, everything, like just because you're just like, I just want to know who did it, right? That's the human impulse. In a failed experiment, you have to be confused about it or curious about why did it fail for it to have any use whatsoever. If you knew it was going to fail along and it just confirmed you already know, you're just going to write it off. It's like, don't even bother. There's no mystery to it. So I really believe in test things that you strongly believe are going to work, so that you'd be confused if they don't work. And that goes to also who you should test with. Always test with early adopters, people who are like the most, try to set the experiment up for maximum success. Make it as easy as possible for it to win. You know, like you're selling something that puts somebody's house, that's like, you know, puts fire out. Like sell it to people who actually have a house on fire right now. Because you're like, look, if someone whose house is actually on fire right now and I have a bucket of water and they still won't buy it from me, something is severely wrong with my idea and I need to understand why. Like obviously, versus, you know, someone who's like worried their house might be on fire in the future, it's a harder sell.
Let's use a real example on that, because I think that idea is really important.
Does anybody have an early adopter situation question that they're like wondering about? Should I sell the segment A or segment B instead? Guess not. Oh, well, you actually have a one that you're bailing us out a second time? That's impressive.
No, I really have an early adopter issue. So helping people have funnier presentations.
Yeah.
After I was doing customer development with some speakers who got on stage at this conference, and I learned very quickly not to give them feedback about the presentation. Whenever they get off stage. And so,
Yeah, that's awful.
yeah, it's pretty bad news. But one of the things I'm struggling with is just how to present that to them. You know, like,
Yeah.
hey, do you want to be funny? You know, that's like a bad question to ask.
Right. Yeah, it implies that I'm not funny.
Yeah, but I mean, you're funny.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Appreciate that. But you know, better not suggest otherwise, or I'm not going to be your customer for sure. No, exactly. I think that's exactly right. So, if you have a hypothesis that being funnier on stage is good for you in some way, then first of all, we've got to be clear, what's the benefit to the customer that they're trying to achieve? So my guess is this, you know, people didn't come to comedy school, so they're not here to be, like, they're not interested in being funny for its own sake. You know, they're probably interested in some other business result that they could get if they had some humor in their presentation. I certainly know, I mean, if you've ever given public presentations, like the difference between an audience that will laugh at a joke versus one that's like stony face silent, very different both in terms of how it feels as a presenter and also in terms of what kind of results you get. So I can imagine all kinds of different value propositions you could have, either to be more effective in your presentations or just to feel better while doing it, so you don't have that god-awful experience of everyone like staring at the floor being like, what's going off stage? So imagine that you are going to try to sell some kind of service to those folks. Do you want to start with people who are already pretty funny and things are going well? Or do you want to talk with people where it's like physically painful to listen to them on stage? I think you really, really, really want to start with the physically painful. Not because I want you to have an easier time selling, but if you go to someone and you're like, you were just doing a sales presentation to a room full of 20 people, and you whiffed in the worst possible way. Not only did you not make the sale, you like lost sales as a result, right? It was like, you cost the company money, you made the brand worse, and like horrible things happened. It was a disaster. You're like, I can make that problem go away from you by teaching you 3 simple tips to do next time. If that person won't buy your product, you got a serious problem. Like that's like made for you. That's like the home run scenario. If you can't sell to that person, you're certainly not going to sell to the person who's moderately funny. If your theory is that this is who the product is for. Now, maybe your theory of who really needs your product is wrong. And that's the thing with this early adopter thing. The reason you go to the early adopter is to give yourself the opportunity to be wrong. Now, what you're wrong about, you know, you got to figure that out. Sometimes your product value proposition is terrible. So nobody will buy it. It's just, there's no customer for it. But often what you need to do, we call it a customer segment pivot. Sometimes you have the right product, but it's the wrong segment. So actually, you thought this would be a product that would help really painfully shy people, like be more effective in their presentations, but actually, it's for people who already think that they're funny to like have more fun while being even funnier or something. So like, it could be that you were wrong about who to target, and so now you need to make a pivot to try a different target and go try it. But whatever your current theory is about who the customer is, go to the most extreme, need or use case for that thing to really give yourself a chance to be wrong. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
How do you know in that you're not just pivoting around because you have an idea that's not going to take with anybody? When do you stop?
This is an old Steve Blank rule. I never used the exact phrasing, he likes that, but I'm having trouble now remembering exactly what it is. But that basically you want to try as hard as possible to find a customer for the product as currently specified. So you go everywhere. You do as many customer segment pivots as it takes, just like, okay, I'm going to try this segment, this segment, this segment, this, and when you have exhaustively, conclusively been like, you know what, I just can't find any customers for this damn thing, and I've like died trying, then consider more of a strategy, like more deeper strategy pivot or a different thing. The only exception to that I believe is sometimes you have to do what we call customer pain point pivot, where you realize we actually have a great segment. Here's a set of people who have discretionary budget, and we care about them a great deal, and it's not that they don't want to buy something from us. It's just that the problem we're solving for them is just not important. But in the course of talking to them, we discover this other unbelievable problem that we're even more excited about. So screw that old problem, we're on the new problem train. I think that is an exception, but don't do that every week. Like, the point of a pivot is to be a rare and infrequent and fairly painful thing to do when you're really convinced that the old thing you're doing is not the right thing, or that there's a need to really go there. Don't be the people that pivot all the time and they're so proud of it. That's no good.
All right, so you just mentioned customer development, and we talked a little at the very beginning about talking to more customers, but we haven't had a lot of that struggles that people have talking to customers and learning from that, applying the ideas. Any of that kind of stuff going on in here? Questions on understanding your customers better? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. All right, so I do want to get, do you have a question about it?
I was just saying we got to understand our customers better.
Yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden our moderated topics is falling off.
Just
What's going on?
Yeah.
Everyone's still there? What's happening out there?
I do have a little bit of a theory on this, so it'll be a little hard to prove, but we didn't have snacks at the break, and I'm a little worried everybody's just low blood sugar, and we totally blew that. All right, we'll do better on that one next time. So let's talk a little bit more about experimentation, because there's sort of no end to the number of questions about how to run successful experiments, what that even means, how do we structure them, how do we learn from them. And I'm wondering who in any sector, in any kind of segment, has an experiment that you ran, it didn't work out, and you don't really know why, you don't know how to understand it, or you're kind of struggling with reading the results of your experiments. Do you have that going on? Okay, I'm going to hang on to Richard for a sec. Anybody besides somebody who's spoken yet? No? All right. Richard will give you another shot.
I'm actually going to give you the converse situation. So, tech startup, highly talented individuals had an idea for an accessory for a very well-known embedded computer board. Very clever guy, and he's already trialed it with one or two people, wants to ultimately come up on Kickstarter, and it's the classic one of trying to get a talented, creative person to get to the point which is simply saying, you've done enough experimentation, you don't have to make it perfect. So really just looking for those, what are the kind of things, perhaps as a business mentor or you're an investor, to get to moving somebody from that. You've done the experimentation, there's certainly enough indication that there is a market out there, and particularly in the Kickstarter model where you're going to get fairly instant feedback because you're back to the one of if somebody's prepared to pay for it, there's clearly some interest.
Yeah, the indefinite procrastinator. There's a couple different ways to approach this. I mean, the best is if you have sufficient leverage to force them to do it. So, when you're an investor, when you're in a corporate setting, and sometimes just through your moral authority, you can just be like, look, you have to do this. So, like, get a customer on Monday, or don't ever call me again. Like, to some people, it just need the kick in the pants. You know, you just got to say, look, you have to do it. Here's the deadline. And here are the consequences if you don't comply with the deadline. So sometimes it's just like fear of, you know, the fear of jumping. It's like you got to do it. Where that's not a possibility, then you have to get them to want to do it, and that's tricky. So you can try the fear approach. People talk a lot about fear of failure. You know, I was talking on stage the other day. We get accused all the time of celebrating failure, making people not afraid of failure, not stigmatizing failure. I really don't know where that comes from, to be totally honest. I'm still scared to death of it. And the thing what we want to do is, someone is afraid of getting feedback, we want to make them more afraid of having their company fail. Like, look, it's painful and annoying to put this MVP out there, but won't it be even more painful and even more annoying to spend the next 3 years of your life and then still have nobody buy your product, whereas you could have learned something critically important, and here's 10 million case studies of people who did the thing we're talking about and they were better for it, and yada, 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 yada. And here's the 50 case studies of the web vans of the world, and blah, blah, blah. And there's some people who can respond to that kind of fear-based approach. And then there's some people who are just like, I still don't want to do it. And then, you know, then you gotta go to the more subtle arts. My favorite one is, you say, look, I'm sure you're right about everything. Whatever it's talking about, I'm absolutely sure you're right. But what could it hurt to double check? I mean, you're a genius. The world is gonna know it. And since you told me this product is amazing, it's gonna be great for everybody to use, and the value proposition is critical. I mean, everything's good, everything's fine. So wouldn't it be nice to like have people celebrate that and, you know, start to give you the feedback of how great you are, and just like try to make it the positive thing. Like, we're just gonna go, like, and since you're so confident, what could it hurt? You know, what's the downside? And if someone's like, well, I'm afraid I'm gonna get negative feedback. Well, I thought it was so great. I need to be afraid of that. Right? Everyone's gonna love it. So what's, and then, you know, then sometimes we'll be like, well, actually, I don't think it's so great. It's like, aha! Now we can have a real conversation. What are you really afraid of? What's really going on? You know, can you get your head out of that place it's not supposed to be and put it in the place that it is supposed to be? That, you know, that can go that kind of place. And sometimes, I'm thinking of a particular case. I'll tell you the story of a startup. Sometimes they just are so arrogant, they can't do it. And sometimes you just have to let them fail. So I'll give you an example. I was doing one of these startup incubator things, and there was this team that had a problem. They were working on a product that solved a problem for me. They were like, we have this thing, and I don't remember now what the problem was, something to do with, I don't remember what it was. I honestly can't remember what the product was, but I remember it being the meeting. I was like, I'll buy that right now. Like, I gotta give you my credit card. They're like, oh, it's not ready, it's in beta, and whatever. I was like, please, no, you don't understand. I have this problem like today. You know, and I tried every trick I just mentioned. I mean, I was like very focused on getting them to launch this product as soon as possible because I wanted to actually buy it. And I was like, ready to give them money. And I was like, look, I've tried a lot of tricks. Like, you know, sometimes when I'm presenting like this, I'm like, look, if you will launch this thing, you know, in the next 48 hours, like, I will personally tweet about it, and I'll blog about it, I'll do all this stuff for you, and do all this free publicity, and you know, and that didn't work. I was like, I'll introduce you to every venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, to that I'm your friend. I was like, every trick I could think of, and they was like, no. Finally, I was like, listen, you're telling me that you are so arrogant that you know better than me what's in my best interest as your customer. You're saying you have this thing that I think is awesome, and in its current form, I say will solve my problem. You're like, no, I know better than you. My precious thing. You are not allowed to have it because you will not use it in the correct way. Like, really, you were that arrogant? They were like so offended. Like, how can you say such a thing? I was like, listen, that's what you're doing. And at the end of the day, they were fine with that. I was shocked. I was like, really? You're really prepared to say you know better, and they just like, they were too precious about it. That product, as far as I know, never launched. I never got the chance to buy it. I never heard from them again. You know, I never saw it in the press, never made it. And that used to really bother me. I mean, I used to get really upset and be like, I had the chance to save someone from a failure and I failed, so that sucks. But now that I've done this long enough, I've now had all kinds of people come up to me at these events and others to be like, you know, I was at that thing where you were talking about Lean Startup, or I first heard about it in this startup, and I was so convinced I didn't need it, and the startup just burst into flames, and we had a horrible failure, now I'm on my next startup. And I don't want to make that mistake again. And at the time, I was so angry at you or whatever, but now I had this voice in the back of my head that was like, what was that guy saying about that thing? Maybe as I'm doing it again, and I just realized, like, if we're gonna play the long game, we're in this for the long term. If some of you probably in this, I don't know, maybe in this room we don't have anybody, but there's probably somebody who's like, yeah, I don't need this is stupid, I'm fine. Those are the people who failed startups are stupid, I'm smarter than that. And now I'm like, listen, that's cool. No, if you're right and I'm wrong, no one will be happier than me for you, truly. I would in fact love it if you would call me up and lord it over me so I could learn from your experience. That would be great. I would learn something new. Here's a situation where you don't need Lean Startup. You just, you know, magically will things into existence and it works. Like, I would love to know where that land exists so I could go there and do that too. So that would be great. And if not this startup, I'll catch any next startup. Because if I'm right and you're wrong, sorry. You know, like I'm really sorry for you. That's gonna really suck. But you know, I don't care if you become Mark Zuckerberg like at any particular time. So if that's 3 startups from now, but this helps you get there, then we've made a huge impact on the world, and I don't mind it. In fact, you had to go through some pain on the way. I did try to warn you, but you know, not everyone listens.
Well, when Eric gives advice like that, I mean, everybody wants to hear, I warned you, but, you know, good luck out there. So let's just open this up for a little bit more oddball questions. I see a hand halfway up over there. Do we have a microphone? Great.
So I'm working with a client right now that's a startup that's essentially building a piece of hardware that helps measure air quality in rooms. Because believe it or not, there's all these studies coming out showing that like optimal carbon dioxide levels can actually increase productivity, and there's all sorts of things that we're not even aware of. And since as humans we on average spend 95% of our time inside, this actually really can have an impact on the quality of our lives. So it's interesting though, because I'm helping him do customer development, but it's lots of the questions and kind of probing I'm doing when interviewing customers is largely around a problem that they scientifically arguably have but aren't aware of. So, I mean, I like to often equate it to almost like Whole Foods in the sense of organic foods. Like 20, 30 years ago, this wasn't nearly top of mind. Now Whole Foods is like disrupting grocery stores. If you were to ask people like, how have you optimized your diet, or like probed around organic foods 20, 30 years ago, people would. So in a nutshell, my question is, how do you effectively do customer development in a context when your customers aren't necessarily aware of the problem that arguably they have?
I'll tell you funny, I saw this funny thing on TV, I don't remember which late night show it was, someone sent me the YouTube video. They were going around interviewing people who were gluten-free and asking them what is gluten. You want to see this video? It's hysterical. Like all these people gluten-free had no idea what gluten is. They're giving these hysterical answers and like, oh, you know, they don't know. They just knew that it was healthy to be gluten-free, but they didn't know why. So there's only 2 ways to solve this problem. One is, so you cannot sell a solution to a problem that people don't know they have. Drives engineers crazy because I know that you have it. It's like, but I don't care. So either you find early adopters who do know they have the problem, maybe because it's more extreme, so people have incredibly bad air quality, or you have to convince people that they have a problem. Like what people forget about the rise of Whole Foods is it rode the wave of an incredible number of activists who have spent the last 20 and 30 years convincing people that organic food is the solution to a real problem, that conventional food is toxic and bad. Sometimes when you want to create a new category, you have to do that work yourself. And it's, you know, it's called positioning, and it's hard work, and those of us in marketing know all about it. And if you're a startup that has that problem, you've got to be prepared to do it. So then your customer development needs to be not how do I sell this product, but how do I convince people that they have this problem? What is the education campaign going to look like? And now it looks much more like a political campaign than it looks like a traditional sales process. What is the language we use? What should I, you know, if we're going to spend marketing dollars teaching people that this category exists, this problem exists, how do you do that? And what are the demonstrations, and you know, how do you do it? And there's all, I mean, you know, if you become interested in this topic, there's a huge literature on how it's done in politics and marketing and everything. I'm not the one to teach you that stuff, but that's where you got to focus on. You got to get away from how do I sell and how to just start with how do I raise awareness. And there's all kinds of famous case studies in history of products that, you know, where the company had to teach people they had a problem so that then they could tell them the solution to that problem.
So just to run off that, so like right now, yeah, in terms of like early adopters, we're targeting essentially people, parents and professionals that have allergies, asthma, or asthma, because they are more aware of those conditions. But even then, like, so I mean, even then, there's people, and they see a correlation between air quality often in regards to the seasonal change, and so they're sensing that there is some correlation between their health and that. So like in terms of like tactile customer development, how would you I mean, what are you probing for? What are you trying to find out about those people that question?
This isn't really a customer development problem. You just got to run the damn experiment. You've already identified people who have the problem and know they have the problem and should therefore be willing to spend money on it. Of course, what I think is going to happen, and I say this as an investor in an air quality device startup, which may or may not be the same one you're talking about, I don't know. But anyway, like I worry about this too. Like, okay, I put myself in the case, I have a severe allergy or I have that terrible asthma and air quality is like, I am a human sensor of air quality. So you give me an alert, air quality is terrible today. Like, I know that already. What am I going to do with that information? Like, that's totally useless. Like, that's what I'm worried about with this. So it's not a customer development problem.
All right, more questions. Yes, right here. And we'll get you next. Yes, that's you.
Yes, just wait. I don't
Oh, wait for the microphone.
Um,
Working his way over.
Hi, thanks. I have another oddball question. My name is Kylie. This is my brother David. He's an agile software developer. I'm a filmmaker, and we've combined forces as siblings only can to put agile and lean processes around how films are made.
Great.
We've run lots of experiments in the last 2 years to kind of work out if this is even possible, if people are interested, and hackathons for filmmakers, and how can we get them to pay attention to this thing that they don't even think they have a problem with yet.
Yeah.
And I guess the question really is, how do you go about trying to create a movement before you can even sell products and services?
Yeah, it's the same question we were just talking about. If this is an evangelism question. First of all, there's a documentary filmmaker named Andi Timoner. I don't know if you know her. She has a startup now called A Total Disruption, and she's a filmmaker who is very interested in such topics, and you should meet her. But most of the people who ask me this question, they're really introverted engineers who know a lot about code and not a lot about public persuasion or media. I'm not looking at anybody in particular, and I ask this question, I'm always like, it's like, did you have any friends who were an English major and you talk about storytelling? But you're a filmmaker already, so I kind of feel like this is a question that answers itself. Like, I see a movie in the making on this topic that needs to be made. Now, use the techniques in your own way to demonstrate that this is both an awesome way to tell a story and tell an awesome story about why it's needed. Am I missing something? Okay, yeah, I mean,
Hard work, yeah.
yeah, I feel like it's kind of been our theme of like, it's kind of, yeah, this is the hard but obvious thing to do. Just, yeah, I would love to watch that movie.
I will jump in here and say, one of the things, this applies to the air quality sensor and the film too, is if you make it and you put it out there and you're trying to sell it and it's not selling, then you have an opportunity to do a different kind of customer development. That why aren't you buying this? Not the like, why would you buy this? Or why aren't you watching this? Or why aren't you adopting these habits? You can go in and get qualitative information that helps you to understand the quantitative data that you have, which was why people weren't interested.
It goes back to the murder mystery thing. Go ahead and get the next person, and then we'll.
Instead, we go over here first.
While we're waiting to the mic.
Yeah.
Back to the murder mystery thing. Like, I've seen people before and after a failed experiment interview the same customer and learn dramatically more after than before. Because like when you're optimistic and things are going well, in your pre-experiment, you talk to someone, you're like, would you buy this thing? And they're like, totally. You're like, great, check. But after you know that they know for a fact that they didn't buy it or they wouldn't buy it, and it's like a total flop, and they're like, totally, you're like, really? And they're like, no. And they're like, why did you just say that? I didn't want to be rude. But if there's no murder mystery, you're not really motivated to get to the bottom of like what is really going on. Yeah.
Okay. So tools. What would you advise or any tips on what tools to use to do all the cohorts and all the data analysis? Because we tried like Excel stuff, we tried Google Analytics and different stuff. Nothing kind of gives you the feeling it's okay, it's easy, I can focus on my experiments, I can focus on the product, not on tools, numbers.
I know. So anyone in this room have a company that sells tools or services to help people do lean startup better? Hands? Yeah, I'm sorry for what I'm about to say. To those of you, just raise your hand. I really don't believe in tools. People ask, and I'll just tell you a story from the old days of lean manufacturing, because I always go back to when I think about this tools thing. Everyone knows that kind of like that period of time in America where people were really afraid of the Japanese and they were taking over everything, and it was like, remember, people who lived through that time, you know what I'm talking about. There was a time when Japanese manufacturing was just crushing American manufacturing. Of course, Toyota and the lean production system were a big reason why. It had really nothing to do with the various cultural explanations and nonsense that you saw in the media at the time. And Toyota, one of the things that's really remarkable about them is they were extremely open and are to this day with their competitors to teach them the system if you wanted to learn. So in the 80s, if you were an American car company and you wanted to go to Japan and take a tour of a Toyota factory and learn everything about how their system worked, they would be very happy to teach you and show you, and they were very open about it. And So I like to visualize, I wasn't there, I was just a kid, but I like to visualize what did it look like when an American auto executive went to Japan in 1982 and saw the factory of the future. What happens? The first thing that would happen is Toyota would explain to them their philosophy of product development, called autonomination, which was automation with a human touch, respect for people, Kaizen. They all these special sayings like every defect is a treasure and no problem is a big problem. And you know exactly what happened. It's American guys like Zen, bullshit, blah, 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 whatever, like tell me the secret. And the guys from Toyota are very polite, I'm sure. We're like, this actually is the secret that we're telling you right now, and you're not listening. And so he's like, whatever, show me the factory. And they would go in these factories, and now today, automated factories and robotic factories, like today a factory is like a temple to technology and automation. In those days, it was not always like that, but the Japanese were huge early adopters of those things, and you just know what happened. You walk in this factory, it's a gleaming, clean palace of automation, and then the auto executive is like, yeah, I got it. Robots. They got the robots, and we don't. All we have is those union guys back in Detroit like, F that, I need to get me some robots. And like Zen, mumbo jumbo, kind of like, F that, I'm going home. And in the 80s and early 90s, American auto companies spent billions and billions of dollars on the most unbelievable automation and robotic systems that accomplished really absolutely nothing. And when finally those companies would bring the Japanese senseis of the lean movement out to the American factories to teach them how to do it, like the first thing they would do is they would come in here and they start ripping out these fancy ERP and material planning processes. Like they just like turning those systems off. They'd be turning off robot, ripping stuff out, and they would do these transformations where they would take the exact same union workers and the exact same plan and process and actually cheaper tools. And they'd got some whiteboards and note cards and just cheap stuff. And they would teach people how to do their work better. And all of a sudden, these factories would be dramatically changed. And then, the biggest, most famous example is the NUMMI plant in Fremont. For many years, a joint venture between Toyota and General Motors, so that Toyota could teach General Motors how to do the Toyota production system in America. They took over the worst performing plant in the GM system. The GM was going to shut down anyway. They had the worst labor relations, the worst everything, and in 1 year, with the same people, same labor contracts, same everything, made it the most productive plant in the GM system. It's one of the most incredible examples of successful transformation with the most dramatic results ever. And for many years, GM would have their top executives like rotate through NUMMI and come see the factory of the future and whatever. And guess what they learned from that experience? Yeah, exactly. Yes? Zero, thank you for that. Yeah, of course, it was not effective. It actually helped Toyota really understand that they could run the Toyota production system in the United States and therefore paved the way for them to be the #1 automaker in the United States, building in the United States. So, it worked out fine for American consumers. GM, was a long and tortured road. My long way of saying the tools and technology. Look, Toyota is a great example of, they did invest early and often in automation. They had great tools. The tools follow the process. They follow the accountability and management system change that you need. They do not precede it. And therefore, anyone who says that they have a tools problem has a management problem that they can't admit. Now, I'm not picking on you in particular, but it's very common. Now, it's true that Google Analytics is not really set up to do the kind of tracking that we're talking about. And that leads to Eric's law of Google Analytics, which is that at any time, no matter how badly you were doing in your company, there's at least one graph in Google Analytics that is up and to the right. Always. So you can always grab that. So it does help you develop bad habits by providing a crutch. But if you really take what we're all saying seriously and say, look, what do I really need to know about my experiments? Like always the kludgy manual way, you can start to track that immediately. I mean, I keep joking about note cards, but note cards are as high tech as it needs to be in the early days of a startup. And a lot of big companies, you would actually wish they would rip out their fancy on-the-church deployment and just do some freaking note cards so you actually understand what's going on. And most of the systems for analytics require you to move your data from its primary location into a data warehouse and munge it and massage it, summarize it, analyze it, and then produce reports from the data warehouse. Everyone's familiar with this process? Which leads to the #1 problem, which is someone looks at the report and you're like, hey, I got a report that says your pet project is the worst idea ever and we should put a bullet through the head. They're like, where did that report come from? Oh, no problem. There's just a 92-step process where we took the data from the primary and it's completely error-free. How do you know? Oh, well, it's really well done, this process that I made up. Like, well, how do I know that the data is correct? I'm sure my pet project is a success, but your reporting is inaccurate. Right? Like, what are you going to say? Like, well, I don't think it's inaccurate. But how do you know? How do you audit the trail of data? Like, it's actually a very difficult problem. People who work in analytics for a living will tell you this is an extremely difficult problem. It's very easy to show that the reports are consistent with other reports. But how do I show that they're consistent with reality? It's a whole different thing. So I would much rather you went directly to the primary data source, by hand, manually, kludgy, whatever, to get data that everyone actually believes, even if it's quite primitive, and use that as your, as your source of truth. And then after you've got many years of long experience doing lean and cohort analysis and split testing, once this has become baked into the DNA of your company, then and only then you can look for automation and other tools to help improve the productivity of what you're already doing. That's where automation is helpful. Once you've already adopted a technique, then tools can help you make that technique more productive. But until then, sorry to all the vendors in the room, like, no cars, no robots.
All right, we've time for a couple more questions. Let's see. I know there was one in the back.
We want new people who haven't asked a question so far as much as possible, if you don't mind.
So let's have a gentleman right here, and then we'll come over here.
Thanks. I actually wanted to go back to the discussion of the testing process, and what you said about the I perceive as kind of first phase is very insightful, and my interpretation is that we are looking to identify a problem rather than provide a validation for the hypothesis that is really in our heads initially. So we're looking for the people that would kind of buy our bucket of water, and the valuable outcome of that experience would be not finding those people, which would point to a problem. If God forbid you found a group of people that actually buy that bucket of water,
yeah,
and you did not identify as big a problem with your initial hypothesis as you needed to facilitate real change, and now you have to think for something else. How do you structure this series of negative hypotheses, which
sure.
I think is what we're really looking for to get to the end results, where your product is really tuned for the market at the current phase?
You have some science background?
No, actually not.
Okay, good. Whenever somebody tweets on my behalf about hypothesis validation, I mean, every time, if my name is in the tweet, then I get the reply of some person from science who wants to correct me that science is not actually about hypothesis validation, but about invalidation for incorrect hypotheses, and I obviously don't understand science. And it's like, I understand. I know. But entrepreneurs are more optimistic than you understand. And if you tell them that what we're going to do is hypothesis invalidation, they're like, well, that doesn't apply to me. That's not going to happen to me. My hypothesis is correct. And I don't know how to get around that problem. And I'm like, well, should we have a semantic argument about which way it should be phrased? Or should we just have them go do the test and then we'll let reality decide? I'm in the reality decide. But it means I get this criticism quite frequently from science people, and I'm very sorry. Really, if someone has a better idea of how to teach this to entrepreneurs, like, do tell me, because I would love to know. But you're absolutely right. Technically, the process of science proceeds by hypothesis invalidation. So if all of our hypotheses were always correct, we would never learn anything. And if that ever happens to you, I submit one of two things is happening. Either you're the world's biggest genius, in which case rock on, or you were deluded, and you have a serious problem and you need the emergency brake. Everyone always thinks, well, that's not me, I'm the world's biggest genius. Well, great, you know what? Like, if you actually believe that, then just keep going until reality will eventually make itself known to you. That's the nice thing about reality, is that you can only evade it for a certain period of time, and what do you do? So for those of us who understand that we want to create the best hypothesis one where you're actually kind of have equal chance of it being right or wrong.
Let's get an example of that.
Of what?
A hypothesis where equal chance either way.
Sure, I have a new product. I mean, we've talked about it many times. I'm making hats, and I'm pretty sure that this customer segment is going to buy it, and I'm confident that's true, but I will kind of learn something either way. If they don't buy it, then I will disconfirm my primary hypothesis, the value proposition is not right for this segment. But see, the thing is, unlike pure science, every entrepreneurial hypothesis has immediate and necessary follow-up that it requires. This is why it's so much better than market research and focus groups. If they buy the hats, oh shit, I now have a hat selling business with 20 new problems I didn't even think about before. Like, what if they return the hat? how much customer service does it need, and like what happens if the hat falls apart if you put it on your head, and I know he's not here anymore, but like I can just imagine all the like logistical problems of the manufacturing distribution of hats, and it's hats. Now make it more complicated products that fail and explode, and you have regulatory so. Yeah, the reason we call it build, measure, learn, the reason I always draw it in a circle, and I will not, I sometimes work with companies who want to do their training, and the first thing they do is they make the build, measure, learn process a straight line. I can't tell you how often they're like, it's not a circle, it's a straight line, and we're like, there's the experimental stage, and the validation stage, and then this stage, and then that stage always goes in one direction from left to right. And I'm like, I will not participate in a workshop with any charts that go from left to right. And I believe in that. Time is a flat circle and the whole thing. So, this is how it has to be. The reason we do it is that what really matters is not did you do that one experiment and did you learn, but rather have you set up a continuous process of experimentation with a fast cadence. So every day, every week, every month, we do the next experiment, the next experiment, the next experiment. I think Heaton Shaw, in his session for those that went to that, was talking about, always be experimenting at something, even if it's something small. And don't allow the experimental pipeline to go empty, because as soon as you get to the time you're like, well, I wonder what we should experiment next and when, you just get into procrastination station. It's like, get into that frequent succession. And so now if I go back to your question, now you're in a situation where if the hypothesis is confirmed, you immediately figure out, well, what does that mean for the next thing that's most risky that I gotta worry about? And if the hypothesis is disconfirmed, they're like, well, how do I continue to try to figure out more about why I was disconfirmed? And so you always have a next experiment to do. Does that make sense?
Kind of, but
that's a no. Okay, it's all right. I can take it.
No. I think in an abstract theoretical way it does, but maybe what we need is a really specific example, as Sarah suggests, to make it a practical discussion. Here's a problem that I see as applies to our business specifically. We are building a network, so we're only concerned about user growth at the moment. That's what we're trying to focus on, to build the process of continuous testing and changing.
You mean a network of humans? You're not laying cable through. Okay.
Yes, network of humans, not fiber optics. So the current situation is that there is an audience that is very engaged. I mean, in an unprecedented way to some extent, and it's difficult to identify what that audience is different from a much wider audience within that demographic that is also going to be exposed to the product. But the problem that is clearly visible is in the conversion of adopting the product and spending more than 2 minutes getting familiarized with it, after which those who have sink into it. Mm-hmm. So we intuitively understand where the problem is, and where we really have to dig deeper to figure out what it is that we're not doing right. And if you build a process around looking for the place where you are doing things right, and the only way you learn is if you don't find that place, then you identify the problem. So the theoretical methodology, as I read it, taking what you're saying literally, and I completely understand, the algorithm, but in our case, it's almost distracting us from the place where we intuitively know there is a problem, to kind of testing our beliefs in what seems to be working okay, and we're risking overspending our efforts.
Sure, I understand. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it goes back to, do we value learning in the abstract or for its own sake or for some specific purpose? When we talk about testing the riskiest assumption and leap of faith, there's a lot of these sort of techniques for, if you're not sure what thing is the most important thing in your business, here are some tools and techniques for helping you identify and come up with a good hypothesis. But if you already know what the problem is, for God's sake, do your experimentation there. Don't be like, well, Eric said I have to go through the leap of faith assumption identification process. I don't start my book with that for a reason. I don't care what you want to test. I'll take for granted that if you tell me something's wrong with your product, that you know better than me, and I'm perfectly happy to be like, well, let's just go double check that you're right, as I said before. So in this situation, it sounds to me like you don't really understand your customer. It sounds to me like you have customers who engage with this and customers who don't, and they are demographically similar, but obviously psychographically different in some way. And we need to understand what that way is. Now, The most common advice you get in these sort of circles is go talk to customers. But I will not give you that advice, and I don't ever give people that advice, to be honest. I feel like telling someone to talk to customers is not helpful because people either think they've already done it, in which case they're like, check, I've already talked to customers, or they don't want to talk to customers, in which case telling them to talk to customers just makes you seem stupid. So either way, what I would rather you do is start to run experiments about those customers one way or the other. So like, if you think you understand why people are not engaging, like, so my guess is if I talk to engineers in your team, they're going to tell me, well, our onboarding process is really bad, sign-up flows are bad, first-time user experience is bad, and so people would use our product, but they just can't quite get through the flow. You heard that before? Yeah. So that's pretty typical. So all right, great. Let's go make the flow better in a classic A/B split test experiment and see if that actually gets more people across the finish line. 10, 15 experiments later, when we still haven't moved it at all and everything's exactly the same as it is today, we'll be like, shit, something is wrong here. And now we will have a mystery, which you don't have right now. Then you have a mystery, which is we think we understand what quality means to the customer. We've improved quality, and yet the customer doesn't agree. What the F is up with that? And now your customer conversations, which you will be very motivated to have, will be extremely productive because you'll be really honed in on why is it that making this product easier to use just makes it easier for people to realize they don't want to use it. What's up with that? And then you'll finally learn something. But until you do enough experiments along that one chain of inquiry to really get everyone on the same page of, well, this is not the issue, something else is the issue, you're going to keep running around in circles.
All right, we have time for just a couple more questions here. Let's see, right here with the scarf? Yeah.
Hi. We are a private health insurance business and we are innovating from inside. We've done a lot of work around customer pain points and we understand that our customers are confused about our product. So we've come up with an idea where we think that we have a solution to the clarity, but after this week and discussions, we're still trying to work out our experiment. We think that the confusion comes when the customers are buying, but the frustration then with the product comes through the usage.
Yeah.
And so now we're at a point where we're not sure whether that then means we need 2 different experiments, and we were trying to work out what our riskiest assumptions are, but we're in a little bit of a cycle of not knowing which way to proceed.
Yeah, I know this feeling very well, and I wish I had an easy answer for you. This is the problem of experimental design. People, when research gets criticized, we get criticized sometimes for having experimental focus, or people don't like this experiment or that experiment, and it's like, can you imagine leveling those same concerns and criticisms at actual science? The Large Hadron Collider is technically an experiment, and so is what you did in your high school chemistry class. So if you're like, high school chemistry class experiments are kind of pointless, so the Large Hadron Collider is also pointless. You're like, I don't think you really understand what an experiment is. There's a lot of different kinds of experiments out there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them are expensive, some of them are cheap, and the challenge is to find the right experiment for your particular situation. And the trade-off that we always face as experimental designers is, do we want a longer, more expensive, but ultimately more accurate experiment, or a cheaper, quicker, but more limited experiment to get an early read on the situation versus a later read? So you can do something that takes 5 minutes, or you can do an experiment that takes an hour, or a week, or a month, or a year, or 5 years. And my guess is if you spend 5 years designing and implementing an experiment to do something, it'll be a very good experiment. But you'll also be 5 years older when it's done. And is that too late for you to figure out? So in general, when in doubt, my feeling is, because we tend to err on the side of too long, go too short. So in this situation, you kind of have this debate. We have 2 different things we want to solve. We could design one experiment to test both. And if you decide that's what you want to do, and that's the only way to do it, I could easily imagine, we're going to have a mobile app where people can buy and use their insurance directly in the app, and then we'll make both of those things easier to do, and therefore after the thing is done, we will show that people really like their insurance a lot more, and it's a great experiment. And of course the app, because it has to do all these different things, will take 2 years to build, and it will take us 6 months to get people signed up, and then of course we have to wait for them to go through their insurance renewal period, so it's another year, and then after a year of using the app, we can show that they're a lot happier, and guess what, that's 5 years. So, what if you needed to do something in 30 days? What could we do? Well, can't do that, I just described, but could we find a customer, who is enrolling in insurance? Could we do something for them that shows that our general approach is right? So could we do, the concierge MVP, the Wizard of Oz test? We have all these names and lingo for all the different kinds of experiments out there that you could do. I'll let you worry about that, but I would say if you're not sure, do the simpler and cheaper thing. because you can always switch to the more expensive one later. And in general, the stuff that you do to build a simpler experiment will also set you up to do the longer experiment. And if you study option theory, which I know most of you don't, but if you did, you would know that having the option to do something is more valuable than being committed to do something, no matter what the thing is and no matter what the cost of the option, price for the option, but like it always makes it more valuable. So here's a situation where, even if you're planning to do something for 5 years, having the option to stop after a month early information is actually worth something. It's valuable. It gives you the opportunity to pivot sooner. And so in general, if you're not sure, do the shorter, cheaper thing. Do them one at a time and then roll them up and do a larger experiment later after you get the validation that you're on the right track. Knowing, of course, that science is for invalidating hypotheses. Okay? I understand it. But you see why it's a problem. Is that helpful?
Yes, thanks. Do you ever come to Australia?
I was there. I don't know if you guys remember Google Wave. Remember Google Wave was a giant Google project that was built in Australia, and I once got the bat signal, like emergency thing, like, could you please come to Australia and help us out? So that was my last time in Australia. I didn't help them out. I tried, but didn't go that well. But yeah, I have not been in a couple years.
I want to add something to that too. You said it sounds like you're at the beginning of thinking about experimenting, right? And so it may not be an either or here with different kinds, because the experiment itself is not the destination. We're not trying to do one experiment and then everything's good. We now know a lot more and we're able to sail into the clear future. It's really an iterative process. You do it a lot, and one of the things you're looking to do is get better at experimenting and do them more often and more quickly. So when you think about, the first one might take a while and might, getting the resources together, getting everybody to figure out how do we do this, it might take 30 days. The next one might only take 15 days to get even more valuable information. But you want to start thinking about ramping it up and not just the one we're going to do, but how do we start to do these regularly? It will go on forever. All right, a couple more. You've had your hand up in the back for quite a long time. In the very back corner, yeah.
Hi, I'm from Alaska. I work at a museum, and I do digital engagement there. And we have a couple programs that we're running against children. The spirit of the programs are to engage a new audience of museum goers so that 10, 15 years from now, they have good neural associations, they come back, they love the place, they love the arts. Our programs are killing it. We're doing great. It's so great, in fact, we have other museums calling us and wanting to emulate what we're doing. Cool. The question I have, though, when target marketing children, is that the parents who bring their children to us, they have to sit for long periods of time. One of the programs we do is wrapped around video games, and so the kids come in and they game, but in a way that also is educational. And the parents look like maybe they want to eat a shotgun because it's a 3-hour LAN party and they're just terrified of this. Yeah. I have pictures to prove it. It's really interesting. So the question is this. When marketing to children, if the parents are already buying the product and they're already bringing their children in, and the focus is the client who is in the future, is it okay if they're bored, or should we be doing something to cultivate that relationship while they're there as well? Because they're our immediate client, because they're the ones spending the money.
Totally. Oh yeah. We talk about multi-segment problems. Parents and kids is like the old classic in the marketing literature, and I cut my teeth on this, in the virtual worlds business because, I don't know what age kids were talking about, but that first thing to do is get super clear on age, and the relationship that parents have with their kids, from a marketing point of view, is extremely different at different ages, and I spend a lot of time marketing to teenagers, which is just the worst, because teenagers generally don't have a lot of disposable income, so the money they spend is their parents. You have a multi-segment problem. You have parents who want their kids to be safe and spend money for things that they enjoy, and you have teenagers who want to buy things that their parents don't consider safe. Like, in fact, if you put on your website, parent approved, super safe, guess how many teenagers will sign up for it? Like, it's like, super down. But if it's super unsafe, parents freak out, and they don't want it, and then we just have a problem with kids like stealing their parents' credit card and buying it illicitly, and then it would show up in the statement, and I would get the phone call. In the early days, I remember getting these calls from parents who were like, is this IMVU? Yes. Why you want my credit card statement? I would be like, sir, do you have a teenage son or daughter? How'd you know that? Is it possible that they have borrowed your credit card? No, absolutely. Little Billy would never do that, such a thing. Is it possible that, they'd be like, I have my card with me at all time, there's no way. I was like, it's possible that Billy has your credit card memorized? No. It's like, do you want us to report this as a fraud to the FBI? That someone has stolen your credit card? Are you sure about that? And they're like, I'll call you back. So yeah, it's extremely challenging, and it's really important. Got to do the Venn diagram. What do kids want? What do the parents want? What can we provide that serves both needs? And I would say, it sounds to me like if parents are making the purchase decision but they're that unhappy about it, are they really going to keep purchasing? Now maybe you don't care, maybe it's something that kids do once and they move on, but like, do the parents talk to other parents? Is there word of mouth between the kids? Is there word of mouth? Like, all those things are stuff to consider, and I certainly would be thinking about, okay, well, go back to value hypothesis, growth hypothesis. Like, in order for us to serve the kids well, and for us to grow to more kids, what's the parents' role in all of that, and how can we modify the product to help them help us? You know what I'm saying? That's how I think about it.
All right, we had another question right there. We actually took the microphone away from you before, so let's hand it back. Thank you.
Eric, I'm Zane, and just had two questions for you. First question is, what are some of your daily habits and rituals that you feel have contributed to your success, and how you've been able to apply the lead?
Did you just walk in?
To your...
Just seriously, this is a real question. Were you here at the beginning?
Yeah.
Didn't I ask that question?
Yeah, did I think I've already answered it. I have deja vu. I thought I answered that question today.
Okay, the second question is then...
It was a terrible answer. Ask anyone, they'll tell you.
What advice would you give your younger self?
My younger self was not an easy person to give advice to. So, I think about this often, actually, because I meet people who remind me of that younger self, and I'm always like, God, I really want to help, and also, I don't know. Yeah, I was very arrogant and extremely confident in my own abilities, and that led me to many, many, many startup failures, as you can read about. I guess most people I asked for advice at that time were like all about telling me how I was going to fail and it was not going to work, and I was stupid, and I was like, well, if you think I'm stupid, then you're stupid. So I didn't, just like right past me, because I thought I knew everything. And so I kind of wish, one of the ways I think about lean startup is like, these are the kinds of ideas with the kind of rigor and the kind of flavor to them that I wish I had had access to at that time. Because although I was super arrogant, I also really, I was a voracious reader, I was pulling in a lot of information, I really wanted to know everything. So I wanted to have information about how to be successful. And now I feel like probably the best someone could have done, they were trying to give me advice then, would have been to be like, look, I know you don't want to listen to me right now, but let me plant a seed. If you ever find yourself in this situation, you'll remember that I said that you had this thing and you can maybe look it up. So like, if you ever find yourself, for example, like lost in the rain yelling at your co-founders because your startup's about to fail, maybe you'll remember that we had this conversation and call me. Like maybe you'll remember that there is such a thing as a minimum viable product that you want to do next time, or like just that's the kind of, I think that's the only like hope of giving someone like me the advice that would have been at all possible. And of course, I wish that my younger self could have known that that it was all going to turn out fine. It would have been a lot less stressed. And I wish that for a lot of entrepreneurs too. I really believe if you've decided to make entrepreneurship your career, and you study it and get better at it and you master it, then you will have success eventually. The odds are actually in your favor, not on any particular venture, but over the course of your lifetime. Especially as entrepreneurial management becomes recognized as more and more of a discipline. It's a very solid and secure career, I think. It's actually a much safer career choice than a lot of other things in this world that seem like they pay well and seem stable, but are going to be gone any minute now. So, relax. It's going to be okay. This isn't your one chance, your one shot, your one time. Actually, the things you learn from this one time will help you with your next one shot. And I know each time you're convinced this is the one and only, but it's not actually. So I wish someone had told me that too. Not that I would have listened to them, but yeah.
All right, that's the first encouraging thing you said, so I think we should end on that. We do have lunch for you all at food trucks today. You should have gotten tickets if you haven't. I think we've got them at the door. We have umbrellas, but miraculously, I believe it has stopped raining.
Don't jinx it.
So, yeah. We do have, you can sit outside, I believe, looks like, but you can also sit at Grace Cathedral, which, as I've mentioned the past couple of days, it's one of your few chances to get in there. That is usually a lockdown fortress, and we've rented some space from them that you guys can use. So thank you so much for joining us and embarking on this experiment with us, and we hope to see you again next year. Thank you.